Page 11 takes us to everyone's favorite subject.
I wonder if we can breeze through it.
Ms. Bosler.
So this was a spring proposal that we put forward to really help right the ship on the Breeze IT project that has been plagued with some significant cost overruns. It is a $23.2 million item, and it's a significant amount of the funding is to be used for state staff that will be really helping to make sure that Wave 1 and Wave 2 are fully operational and that the boards and bureaus are supported appropriately in the implementation of this new IT system. I believe the main difference between the Senate and the Assembly has to do with how this increase will be paid for. The Senate has proposed to just limit the allocation of these resources to the Wave 1 and Wave 2 boards because the current scope of the Breeze project that we've proposed is to terminate the project after Wave 2 and then start a new project going forward to deal with the Wave 3 departments. There was just a lot of anomalies in the current contract that we felt it was best to end this contract and start anew. But that doesn't mean that there's a lot of infrastructure and groundwork that has been put in place at the Department of Consumer Affairs that will be the backbone and support the implementation of new systems for the Wave 3 departments in the future. So our proposal, which is to distribute some of the costs to all three of the waves, we think is still justified and appropriate.
Thank you. I know this has been heard for many, many, many hours in subcommittees. Ms. Kirstein.
Helen Kirstein. One other thing I would note is that the Senate action also approved the positions on a limited term basis. So that was a second difference between the two houses on this item. So we're recommending the Senate approach. We do believe that the positions that are proposed, the 34 positions, are proposed for maintenance of Release 1 and 2 boards and bureaus. We think that workload should decline over time as some of the challenges that the project has encountered are addressed and some of the modifications that are needed to meet the needs of the boards and bureaus are addressed. And we think there's uncertainty about the level of ongoing workload. And then the second piece is the funding, how that's allocated. We do believe it's more appropriate for Release 1 and 2 boards and bureaus to bear the costs, not Release 3. The rationale for that is that at this time, there's lack of certainty regarding the plan for those Release 3 boards and bureaus. In fact, the department has committed to doing a cost-benefit analysis of the appropriate approach for each of those boards and bureaus, and they've indicated that there's a chance that some of them will never be brought on board to the Breeze system. Some of them may be brought on board with Breeze. At this point, it's unclear, and there's no plan for those boards and bureaus. So we just think it's premature for those folks to be paying for the cost of the system.
Right. That is an ongoing conversation here, and one of the major differences between your position and that of Ms. Bosler right now in that you do believe that all of the folks who are part of the boards and bureaus in 1, 2, and 3 should chip in for the costs, and your position is that if you're part of the third wave, that you're not getting any benefit out of it, so why should you be paying? So it's part of the disagreement here. Assemblywoman.
Right. I think one of our issues and concerns was also that as we looked at whether or not the third group would be receiving any benefits, my assumption is that some of the persons hired are going to be the ones developing and consulting with the third section. One of the things that we had in one of the other hearings, I was in Singapore recently, and one of their challenges is IT. Everybody's got an IT challenge. And they were coming to the realization that in order to have a very good and effective IT program, you need to have in-house people. Because you keep going, I shouldn't say outhouse, but it's almost like the outhouse. You keep going outside, and you end up getting people who come in temporarily to deal with issues, to address issues, without realizing that IT is our life at this point, and it's ongoing. And so it's not going to be hiring a couple of consultants every now and then. You need to have your own in-house consultants. You need to have people who can respond to it, who can update things that you need, and maybe you get folks occasionally from outside. But because you don't have those experts inside advising you on what to do, you end up expending an awful lot of money. I went to school districts where we were constantly changing IT. We didn't have in-house people, and we were sold a bill of goods every time you turned around to somebody selling IT to us. And then we'd have to pay a fortune to have them install it and a fortune to maintain it. And by the time people figured it out, it was outdated. And so it's just one, and so eventually you come to understand you need to have a whole department. You need to have staff that's loyal to you and people who could help you make those critical decisions of even how to spend the money, what to buy, what not to buy. You know, it's kind of like we go buy computers and it has 50 things on it. We use one, which is read email and maybe write a letter, maybe 2 things. Other than that, I'm not making movies. I got all that stuff on my computers, don't even know how to use it. So, so the bottom line is, I think even though it doesn't look like they're going to get the services, we believe very strongly they will. And that we have to begin to build a capacity in-house to deal with the IT issue that we face with Breeze and anything else that goes forward.
There are clearly many challenges to these big projects, and I've heard a lot of different suggestions as to how we can best deal with them. One presentation I heard from one of the disruptors in the Bay Area was that there's a lot of talent out there and that we don't need to hire these big, call them dinosaur folks to come in, but you get a couple of people who think about it in new ways. I was going to say some younger people. It's not about age, but just about a new approach to how we do this, and that for a lot less money, we could get a lot better result. But I think what was revealed in some of the hearings is that it's not just about the hardware and the software programming, but the groundwork we need to lay within our own departments so that we understand clearly what our needs are so we can communicate those needs clearly and actually purchase what we need. And that was one of the problems here, that we just weren't organized.
Yeah.
And we're paying the price for it.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes.
If I may, when you're done.
I am finished, so go right ahead.
Okay, thank you. Well, I have a suggestion. I suggest that we don't require these different industries. I have the list of them here, release 1, 2, and 3 boards. I would suggest that we don't require that they pay for the mistakes made by the folks that we hired, and rather this money comes out of the general fund. I think that's inherently unfair to ask these folks to pay for something that they didn't receive, that was done poorly to begin with, and now we're asking them to, that's just, I'm sorry, that's absurd to me. I think we should do right by all these different industries. We've got a whole list of 19 in Release 3 board who will, as you mentioned, get no benefit whatsoever from the money, which is going to be nearly 83 million by my count, because 30 million to begin with, 30 more million was asked for last year. Now they're asking for 23 million, and we still don't have a system that works well. Yet we're going to ask these industries to continue to pay for it. So that's my suggestion.
No, it is definitely a question of equity. That's what we're trying to figure out here. Senator Nielsen.
Well, Mr. Chairman, if I may, I'd like to just read this language from Assembly Republican Leader Kristen Olson that hits it right on the head. In part, the Department of General Services approved contracts with Accenture that included financially risky provisions. The Department, Caltech, did not ensure proper oversight of the Breeze project, and when aware of the project's problem, did not pursue corrective action. DCA did not plan, staff, or manage the development of Breeze, so they should pay the price.
Thank you for that. So we're going to hold this open at this point. Moving to the Department of Housing and Community Development, we have an issue on drought housing relocation assistance, page 12, a governor's proposal.
Yes, and in light of the acute conditions surrounding the 4th year of drought here in California, especially those in our valley communities, the May revision included $6 million for a grant program for a housing relocation assistance program. It's been well publicized, the situation in East Porterville, California, and in Tulare County, where there are many individuals who are living in homes that were served by wells that no longer have any potable water supplies. The idea behind this program would be that it would be available to target very specific drought-affected individuals to allow them the opportunity to make a move to more suitable housing by providing for some flexibility in this program, but maybe the provision of the last deposit that's needed. This would be targeted to low-income individuals that would have difficulty making that move because of those fixed costs associated with moving.
Do we know how many people are potentially in this situation in East Porterville? I know it's really bad. I'm not sure what the universe we're talking about may be.
We estimate around 500 households.
500.
But we are concerned, that's why there's quite a bit of flexibility built into this program, because as the drought continues this summer, there may be other pockets of the state that have similar issues.
Mr. Euler.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Brian Euler from the LAO. Both houses approved the governor's proposal to fund this program in the 7 positions HCD. They adopted differing budget bill language. The Senate, including language that required the department to report back with essentially the regulations for the program before the money could be expended, and the Assembly with language that required part of the outreach to these households, including an analysis of whether or not the funds could be used in a different way besides relocation to assist them in the situation that they're in. We believe that both of these provisions, both the Senate and the Assembly's, address some aspects of the governor's proposal that are currently uncertain, and therefore we recommend a compromise that essentially combines the language both from the Senate and the Assembly into one budget bill language provision.
Thank you, Mr. Euler, and thank you for the LAO compromise suggestion.
And we're comfortable with the compromise budget bill language that everyone is working on.
So move compromise.
All right, we have a motion from Assemblywoman Weber on the LAO compromise. And on the Senate side, we are 3-0, and we will hold the roll on the Assembly side. Page 13 has to do with housing for farm workers. Mr. Euler.
Yes, this issue relates to augmentations proposed both by the Senate and the Assembly for farm worker housing. The differences in the amount of the augmentations and the programs that are supported. The Senate approved $225,000 for Napa County farm worker housing centers. The Assembly proposed $20 million, which includes $250,000 for those same Napa County centers. $12 million for the Joe Cerna Jr. Farm Worker Housing Grants Program, $4 million for the California Self-Help Housing Program, and $3.75 million for the Office of Migrant Services. We don't have a specific recommendations on this issue. It really comes down to a matter of how the committee and the legislature weighs the need for this farm worker housing against its other general fund priorities.
Again, one of those tough choices that we're going to be making. The difference between the two proposals, Senate and Assembly, comes to nearly 20 million general fund dollars. So we're still working on a conference compromise, and we'll return to it. Senator Lara.
Thank you. I just want to reiterate as we look at obtaining a compromise on this, just to make an additional note, as we talk about the drought has meant a severe reduction in work and income for our farm workers. And that has impacted, obviously, not only their income, but the production of reduced crops. That means less work for some of our most vulnerable workers that are often in need of funding for housing and so I think it's critical that we support our workers that, in turn help feed the nation and feed our state. And just to note that this is a Latino caucus priority, so I look forward to working with both the chair and vice chair on a compromise.
Thank you, Senator Lara. To be continued. The governor's earned income tax proposals on page 14, which Ms. Bosler will walk us through, both the Senate and the Assembly are in support of it. The difference between our two houses being some trail bill language, which we'll get to in just a minute. Ms. Bosler.
I'm going to introduce the proposal, but I'll turn it over to my colleagues to give more of the details, but just that this is a major proposal in the May revision, creating the first ever earned income tax credit program in the state of California, really piggybacking on the federal earned income tax credit. The cost of the credit would be roughly $400 million annually, and we do target our credit to a lower income subset of what the federal credit currently applies to. And so in that, we hope that these monies will be able to help to reduce some of the deep poverty that we see in our state currently. And I will turn it over to my colleagues to go through the fine points of the credit.
Welcome.
Good morning, Kristen Shelton, Department of Finance. As Ms. Bosler kind of gave you the high levels, the more specifics of the proposal that was adopted by both the Senate and the Assembly is really targeted to three kind of broad classes of income levels. So folks that are working but making low wages. For those individuals that do not have any qualifying children, their eligible wages are capped at about $6,500, and they would receive a credit at the federal level of about 7.65% of those total earnings. The state would then match that by 85%. If they have one qualifying child, their income level that we would consider for the state credit would be capped at $9,880. And if they have two or more children, they would be capped at $13,870. For those groups, they would get percentages at the federal level of about 34 to 45% of their income, depending on how many children are present in the family. And then for the state match, it would also be at that 85% rate. So you would have credits potentially ranging, depending on the earnings, from about $200 for an individual with no dependents up to $2,600 for three or more. Again, very complicated formula that kind of looks at their earnings and includes both phase-in and phase-out ranges. With that, the main difference that's before you today is really legislative intent language that was adopted by the Assembly that would basically outline their intent or the legislature's intent to increase this program and the funding levels that are outlined in the future. Of course, the intent language would still require future legislative action as the caps and the phase-in range and phase-out ranges are specified in statute.
Thank you, Ms. Shelton. Mr. Cisney, welcome.
Jason Cisney, LAO. That is the main difference in the agenda. This is one of the governor's larger proposals in the May revision. The administration's proposed structure would allow the amount of the credit to be adjusted in each budget act. And so while it seems the intent of the proposals from the houses is for this to be a credit for the foreseeable future, it under the governor's proposal would be able to be adjusted from year to year. And so as you think about the mix of one-time and ongoing commitments to make in the budget, this is an interesting one. It's a significant amount of money, but one of the things to think about, including when you think about the Assembly's proposed language, is this $380 million something that you want to see extended into the future, to grow in the future, and that's really one way to think about the issue before you.
Certainly. And as you point out, it is interesting with regard to one-time ongoing, because in effect, this, as proposed by the governor, is being paid with one-time money. This is the repurposing of the CHIP program money we're getting from the federal government one time for 2 years, correct? $381 million?
Not specifically, no. That is one of the single factors that did help our budget in the May revision, because we did have that additional federal funds that we weren't planning on in January. Those monies were extended for 2 years. But when we do our multi-year budgeting, we do have, there's many different changes in the expenditures and revenues. But we'll note that in 18-19 we do have about predict about a $2.5 billion operating deficit, which is why the governor is not comfortable committing to significant additional ongoing expenditures over the forecast period because it is so uncertain.
Right. But my point, and correct me, is that the $381 million we're getting this year and then in the budget year and the budget year plus one is from, of CHIP, is $381 million.
It did happen to be a very similar amount.
This happens
Coincidental.
to be just coincidental. And that is for 2 years. We won't see it 3 years from now.
Not now unless the federal government takes a different action. But that's one of the many uncertainties is how will the federal government treat many of our major funding streams that we get from them, specifically related to the Medi-Cal program.
And as this is not an entitlement, it may continue and may be expanded as per the intent language, all dependent upon what our revenues are at any time.
This would be, yes, it would be more flexible than an entitlement would be.
Yes, Senator Nielsen.
Mr. Chairman, if I may.
Yes, of course.
Finance, is this going to be scored, the earned income tax credit, as an ongoing expense to the budget, or is it a one-time help out? How are you scoring it?
Sure.
In terms of your multi-year
Right. As we considered our multi-year projection, we included this $380 million throughout the full forecast period. So we treated it as if it was an ongoing program. Yes.
Okay. So it's going to, you're envisioning this being an ongoing program?
That is certainly the intent as it's outlined today.
Okay. Mr. Chair, I move the assembly version with technical changes and with the, I think it's BBL?
With regard to the BBL.
With regard to the BBL, I was going to say TBL.
Is it?
The assembly difference was for proposed trailer bill language that would specify the intent to increase the program in the future.
Because I have.
With the chair. Right. I believe we're in agreement with the trailer bill language, but there are some technical changes to be made to the budget bill language.
That is correct.
In the assembly version.
Right. We're combining just two provisions to avoid a potential single subject issue.
Very good. So that is the motion before us, to take the assembly version with some minor technical changes to their budget bill language, not to the trailer bill language, which deals with the intent language. And so the vote will be 3-0 on the Senate side and 3-0 on the Assembly side. Moving on to page 15, seismic safety retrofit programs. And this was an Assembly proposal.
Brian Weatherford with the Legislative Analyst's Office.
Welcome.
Thank you. The Assembly, in their budget version of the budget bill, provided $15 million annually for two items involving seismic retrofit incentive programs. The first one, the Earthquake Brace and Bolt program, was recently created by a joint powers authority between the Independent California Earthquake Authority and the Office of Emergency Services. However, the Assembly has also recently passed two bills, AB 1429 and AB 1440, out of their House that would create and expand this program in statute. The program is currently funded at $1.2 million a year by the CEA using funds set aside in statute for earthquake mitigation. The Assembly's budget trailer bill provides an additional $3 million in general fund for 5 years. And the second item, the Assembly proposed the creation of a new income tax credit for qualified seismic retrofits. And as we understand this item, the related trailer bill would cap the amount of the tax credits at $12 million per year for 5 years. And it's a 30% tax credit on qualified retrofits. And a closely related bill, AB 428, also passed out of the Assembly this week, that would create a similar tax credit, but a key difference between the trailer bill and this budget bill and that bill is that the Assembly bill is not capped.
Thank you, Ms. Bosler.
This was not part of our budget, and so.
Right. Mr. Weatherford, is this a first come, first served? I would imagine the
both
need is so
programs
great
are-
throughout California, 15 million.
Both programs are first come, first serve.
Right, doesn't go that far.
One is a grant, one is a tax credit. So with the tax credit, my understanding is that after taxpayers complete their retrofit, they receive certain documents from the local building code local building code enforcement authority, whether that's county or city level. And then they would provide this documentation to the franchise tax board when they file their taxes. And if they hit the $12 million cap, then there's no more tax credits allowed for that year.
Understood. Do we have any idea what the retrofit need is throughout the state? Are there any estimates?
Not that I'm aware of,
It could be enormous.
but there may be. It might be appropriate to ask someone from the California Earthquake Authority or Department of Finance.
Jeff Carasone, Department of Finance. According to the Earthquake Authority, there's about 1.45 million homes that could be retrofitted.
I would imagine many of them in my district. So this, again, is going to be a matter of spending priorities for us. So I think, yes, Senator
Yeah,
Nielsen.
I would simply, I'd like to be supportive of that. I would like to see the language. Will that be emulated in the language in the Monning bill or the Nazarian bill? There are two bills on this general area. Are those going to be what you call the trailer bill language, or do we know?
So my understanding is that it's similar but not identical language.
To answer your question, it would be trailer bill language that you want to see.
Yeah.
We have language for.
So the point is, I guess when we close in the open items, we'll get to see the trailer bill language.
On its way to you,
Got it.
as we speak.
You're way ahead of me, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
No, I have to thank my vice chair here for that. Thank you, Assemblywoman Weber. So we'll come back to that. Yes. And you didn't have to wait 72 hours. Page 16.